Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts, Thin Coats with me, Phil, the Glacial Geek. So today we are going to be talking about what army you should play in 8th edition, or at least how to figure out what army you should play in 8th edition. And I will be working on these Vanguard vets and the Terminators again. I'm going to go over. I really haven't had time to do a lot of painting recently, so we're just going to continue off where you guys last saw me, which is going to be putting on, continue doing the red. I've got finish up this one guy and then do a second coat on the other guys, maybe then finish up the second coat on him, and then who knows, maybe we'll move on to a gold. Remember I was talking about the gold? I actually picked up a Retributor armor, which is a base gold. It looks a little darker gold than I've been using. I've been using the Auric or armor gold, but I've got this, picked up this, see how this works. I'm kind of excited to see how it does, so we'll see what happens with that. Maybe not today, but we will eventually see what happens with that. So, with 8th edition coming, a lot of people are worried that their armies are going to be obsolete, that they're not going to be able to use them, worried about what the power dynamics are going to be, and all of that is understandable because things are going to change drastically. I think things are going to change drastically. But catching up on everything that they've been talking about, I don't think that any army is going to be unusable. I think every single army that they make is going to have its uses and is going to be a viable army that you can use in games. You know, I don't think any army is going to be throwaway anymore. I don't think that you're going to need to have like a high dedication to the army to really want to play it anymore. I think every army is going to be able to fight and win some games of 40k in this next edition, which I think is fantastic. I think the greatest benefit for this is that you're now able to choose an army that you want to play and play it. You don't have to try to choose one that you think is going to be super viable on the tabletop versus one that you find the aesthetic or the lore better for. So in 8th edition, the army that you should play is now the army you want to play. Because the army you want to play is going to be able to be used. And it's going to be able to be used effectively. So with the changes that they've had to charges, the changes that they've had, they just recently announced with charging out of transports, I think close combat oriented armies are now going to be extremely strong and viable again. You know, I think you're going to have your standard Thunderwolf cavalry are still going to be super good. The changes that they've talked about for Tyranids sound really promising, and I think they're going to be strong again. A lot of the big monstrous creatures, I think, are going to be viable now. I think you're going to have, now that vehicles can charge, vehicles can take part in assaults, which I think is going to add a whole new dynamic for absorbing Overwatch, you know, because if they charge first and you suddenly get locked in, they can't Overwatch anymore, you know what I mean? So if suddenly that Rhino that you just got out of, that you're going to charge from, decides to charge as well, and you charge with it first, if it gets into base to base, they're locked in combat. And suddenly now the dangers of Overwatch are a little bit more mitigated, because those vehicles that you traveled up the board with can now absorb that. So assaulting becomes very strong now, because you have a whole lot of different options for getting your armies into combat, which was always the issue. You know, even in 7th edition, there were a lot of armies that were oriented towards close combat, that were good at close combat. But a lot of those units were only good if they could actually get into combat, which became very difficult in 7th edition because of all the various forms of Overwatch. It really became troubling to get into combat, because suddenly, you know, you had to face an entire wall of fire that was coming at you. And I think Overwatch is still going to be a thing. I think you're going to still see Overwatch being difficult to handle, but at the same time, I think Overwatch is now, you can now mitigate it by charging the vehicle that you were riding up with. So suddenly you want to get that, assault squad into combat, but they just got out of a Rhino. You charge that Rhino in there. That Rhino is going to have a toughness that's going to be higher and more difficult for the weapons to hit. Every weapon can hurt now, but it's going to be more difficult for them to hurt that Rhino than it would have been that assault squad, and it could probably absorb the shots a lot better. Or if you're rolling up in a Land Raider, boom, that Land Raider is now suddenly charging and absorbing those shots, and he's going to be super tough, super difficult to take down. He's probably not going to go down to Overwatch shots. So, assault now becomes viable. Shooting doesn't sound like it got a whole lot worse. You know, it sounds like they boosted the abilities of Overwatch, not Overwatch, that they boosted the abilities of assaulting and didn't really take down the abilities of shooting. You know, maybe gun lines might be a little bit more vulnerable, that assault can actually happen and get them locked in. A lot of armies like Tau are still going to be probably a little more, are going to be just as suspect to, just as susceptible, I should say, to assault as they were before. And now because of, you've got, you know, cover charges from rhinos and whatnot, that they're going to have to deal with that. But I still think they're going to be extremely strong. You know, shooting doesn't sound like it got any worse in this new edition, which means that all of those armies that used to shoot, the Tau, the Eldar, whatnots, they're all still going to be able to shoot, and shoot very well. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how things play out that way. Yeah, so choose the army that you find interesting and you can make it work. This isn't to say that I think that every single unit in the entire game is going to be just as viable as the next, but I do believe that every army in the game is going to have the ability to compete, and is going to have the ability to put up a strong showing in a battle, which in the end is exactly what you want to see. You know, you shouldn't go into a game, look at the two armies by name alone and go, well, you know, that doesn't look good, you know? Because now with 7th edition, if you look in there and you're like, oh, well, that's orcs playing against Tau, you know, good luck to the orcs. That's going to be very difficult for them to pull off. And it's true. It's become a very difficult thing for a lot of armies to handle. You know, Astra Militarum is just frankly not as strong as Eldar or Tau or even Space Marines in the 7th edition. But I think in 8th edition that they're going to be strong. You know, with Leman Russes not getting popped because of one lucky las shot or one lucky melta shot, they become more durable. And the longer they're on the field, the more they can bring to bear those weapons that they have. And that makes them a game changer. You know, that makes them more viable, makes them more of a threat. And with them being more of a threat, suddenly that tank squadron is a force multiplier. You know, they suddenly have more of an ability to make an impact in the game, which is what makes an army viable. You know, with the Eldar armies, the reason they were viable in 7th edition was because everything that was being brought could make an impact on the game. You know, and there were situations where a lot of that was being reduced in other armies. You know, so that when these guys are going into combat they're getting, you know, when Astra Militarum are being put on the table, their tanks are not staying on the table as long in 7th edition, and that means that army isn't going to be able to hold up as long. You know, if a Land Raider is getting immobilized and popped as it's coming across the table, it doesn't become as viable anymore. But now with the toughness the way it is and everything, I think you're going to see a lot of those units now becoming more and more viable. The more viable a unit, and the more that you have viable units in the game, the more you're going to see a parity in the game, because now they're going to be able to be there and do what they were designed to do during the game. I think the big reason that you see these disparities is because they enabled armies to limit the ability of other people's armies to do what they were supposed to do. You know? So you had Tau gun lines that suddenly made it impossible for Astra Militarum tanks to actually come to bear upon them because of their ability to shoot. You know? You had Eldar jet bikes that just by sheer fact of the amount of shooting that they could bring to bear made it impossible for horde armies, or hell, made it impossible for any army really to come to bear upon them, because they would just take them out before they even got within a reasonable understanding of when they could actually do anything to them. And I think in 8th edition they're making a big emphasis on game balance, making a big emphasis on making sure that every army is viable. You know, they talked about in the Tyranid Focus article at the end. They mentioned how Pyrovores, which are a much maligned unit now, are going to be usable again. You know, they didn't sit there and sing their praises the entire time, and I don't think that they're suddenly going to become the must-have unit of a Tyranid army. But the fact that that's even being mentioned shows that they're really looking to balance out these armies so that you can bring what you want to bring and it can have a chance on the battlefield, which I think is fantastic. I think that makes it awesome. And I think at that point, you have to sit back and go, well, what army do I want to bring? You know, because in 7th edition, it would be really easy to look at the top 10 teams, that top 10 lists that performed well at the LVO, go, all right, well, I'm going to choose one of those guys because they seem like they're good armies. And the fact was, they were good armies. And those were the top armies that were consistently ending up at the top of these tournaments because of their list, because of the armies and the codexes that they had. Now, with everything kind of getting a balancing out, you're not going to... I mean, who knows? I might be proven wrong after the first major tournament in 8th edition. But I don't think you're going to see that kind of singular focus of armies at the top. I think you're now going to see a lot more armies that are going to... There's going to be a wider variety of armies that are competing and performing well based upon the player's ability now, which is always what you kind of hope, you know. And there's always going to be the aspect of dice, which, you know, they can screw you or bring you up. But I think what you're going to see is much more of the better players are going to perform well regardless of what army they have. And I think that's really what I've always wanted. You know, I think that's what a lot of people have always wanted. Where at the end of the game, at the end of the day, the army that won, the team that, the guy that won was the person who was a better player. And that's the way it should be. And that's the way I feel like 8th edition is looking like it's panning out for. So yeah, getting back to what army you need to play comes completely down to what you want to do. So are you looking to get in someone's face with a whole bunch of dudes and just, you know, pound them into the ground? Then maybe you want to pick up Tyranids. You know, they look like they're going to be strong again. They talked about the, it looks like the Gene Stealers and the Tyranids are going to get the treatment that they got in Gene Stealer Cult, which is made them really strong with a 5-up invul, with all those attacks that they have. I think it's going to be very, very strong. And if you look at that, I think you're going to have a situation where they're going to be viable, and they're going to still be good at doing what they've always done, which is get in your face and eat you. You know, that's what the army is that's what it does well. And now I think in 8th edition, that kind of tactic becomes viable again because of the changes to assault. So yeah, they're going to give it a shot. They can go up there and they can do what they want to do, which I think is going to be a lot of fun, and I think it's going to be great. So maybe also, if you like that tactic, maybe look into orcs, you know? And I think at that point, you know, when you're choosing your army, choose the one whose aesthetic you find pleasing. Because if you choose an army that you think looks cool, you're more likely to want to build them, more likely to want to paint them, more likely to want to keep up with them. And if you're more likely to do that, you're going to be more invested into the hobby, into the game, and it's going to make it more enjoyable for you. You know, the more you get an investment in it, the better things are going to do for you, and you're going to get a better return on investment in this game if you feel commitment to it. If you're just doing it because this seemed like the list that the internet said was best, you're probably not going to want to sit there and paint it for a couple hours at a time. You're not going to want to sit there and make a whole bunch of lists. You're not going to want to read up on the lore of your army. And as such, I think you're going to be missing out on a whole bunch of, a lot of the fun aspects of this hobby that we do. I've gone over that in other videos. I'm not going to wax too long on that. But I think that if you choose an army that aesthetically pleases you, or lore pleases you, that you like the idea of, the concept of, if you choose them, you're more likely to stick with it and go at it. And that's going to make this a much more enjoyable endeavor for you. So if you're looking for an army to start in 8th edition, look into yourself and figure out what it is that you want to have as an army. Look at the kind of tactic that appeals to you. Do you like getting up there and punching someone? Do you like sitting back and shooting people? Do you like a mix? You know, and you can go from there and figure out an army that works well for each of those. You know, so if you like to get up in someone's face and punch them, Thunderwolf Cavalry and Space Wolves is a great idea. You know, they're still going to be strong in this next edition. Maybe you want to go with a whole bunch of boys and go with a, you know, riding in battle wagons as they shoot up the board. That's going to be really strong for orcs. You know, maybe you want the Tyranids going up with the Trigons, coming up through their tunnels, bringing guys with them. Sporocytes, I'm sure, are still going to be dropping down, bringing in guys. Or even just a horde of Griblies just charging up the field. You know, they're going to be viable again. And I think you can make a good list with all the various things. The Swarmlord, did you see him? Looks badass. You know, the way they've been balancing out these stats on these armies. And granted, we don't have any points yet, any real points. So I think it's hard to really tell how balanced everything truly is until we really see the finished product, which hopefully will be coming out sooner than later. But at the same time, getting the general sense of looking at how things are going, there's a lot of boons that they're giving to a lot of units that had universally been considered a little underpowered, you know? And they pulled back on some of the ones, like Space Marines. Regular Tactical Marines are now Leadership 7, which is back from Leadership 8 the way they were. But now Sergeants are actually matter, you know? So they're no longer just a guy who's standing out there just like everyone else. They actually make a difference, because now you're going to have their Leadership 8 versus the Leadership 7 of your regular dude bros. So they're changing things up. Looks like they're balancing things up, making things more important than they used to be, making other things more viable than they used to be. And I think what you're going to end up with is a lot of parity in this system. I think you're going to end up with, you know, there's probably going to be certain armies that perform better just because of who they are, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to be so blaringly blatant that every army is going to be run like that. And I think that 8th edition is going to open things up and allow you to take the army that you want to do, and as long as you're good, as long as you're tactically sound, and as long as you give it some thought when you're making your list, you'll be able to hold things down. And I think all-comer lists are going to be much stronger, because you're going to see a wide variety of different armies coming, so you can't really just assume that you're going to see a whole bunch of Eldar. You can't just assume you're going to see a whole bunch of Tau. You know, you probably will, but you can't just assume that that's going to be the majority of what you face anymore, because everyone's going to be able to bring whatever they want. And if you're choosing an army for what's going to perform best, look at yourself and look at your gameplay and look at the way that you play. And at that point, choose an army that fits that. Because that's going to serve you better than trying to figure out which army's got, you know, the biggest numbers. You know, which one's got the best stats and which one's going to have the brokenest anythings. Because no longer are there going to be, you know, faction-specific formations. Everyone's going to have access to the same builds. Everyone's going to have access to the same detachments and formations and list building, which I think is great, because you're no longer just choosing, you know, the double demi codex. You're choosing Space Marines, you know, and you have to build the Space Marines just like everyone else builds theirs. And I think that's going to make it so that, you know, if you don't have a whole bunch of free transports coming because of the army that you chose, suddenly you've got to make the same choices as everyone else does. And that's going to make things more even. And that evenness makes it much easier to play any army you want to play. So, yeah, I would go look inside is the key point of this, and figure out what it is you want to do. And figure out what it is that drew you to this hobby, because odds are you weren't drawn to this hobby because of Double Demi Company. You know, odds are you weren't drawn to this hobby because of Decurion formations. You know, odds are you weren't drawn here because you just wanted to stomp some face. Odds are you were drawn here because of something. And whatever that something is, you need to look at it and choose an army that fits with that. So choose an army that goes back to the basics of what it is you enjoy about this game, and you can make it work in 8th edition. Because 8th edition is going to have a bigger variety of ways to play. And, you know, and it also comes with some understanding of the way things are. You know, if you want to play a smash mouth, in your face, assault heavy kind of army, kind of list, then you don't want to choose Tau. You know, they're not suddenly going to be great at assault in 8th edition. They're probably going to be very similar to what they played in 7th edition. just with the balancing out with the way things work, with points, with units, with values, whatever they might be. And so choosing an army in 8th edition is going to be it's hard to say, because it's going to be, on the one hand, more difficult because you can't just look and choose the one that performed well at the last, tournament. But it's a lot easier because you can now, you're more free to choose the kind of army you want to play. And I know there's a lot of people out there that say you should never have chosen armies based upon how well they perform on the table, but there are people that did that, and I think that was a viable understanding, because going into every game and getting your butt kicked is not fun. And if it starts to become not fun, you're not going to want to do this. So if you can find a way to keep having fun in this hobby, then you should keep doing it. And I think it's a strong way of going about it. But because of the balancing that they're doing with 8th edition, that's no longer really necessary. You can play whatever army you want to play and still be competitive on the table. So with that in mind, you need to, like I said, sit back and figure out what it is that you want to do and figure out what appeals to you. Did the concept of regular Dubros facing off against hideous creatures from another world as their friends got slaughtered around them, but they still held strong and fired their weapons into their face? That's a really gruesome and crazy and intense concept, and it's what's made a lot of the novels really great in the Black Library. And if that's what appeals to you, then maybe you want to take a look at the Astra Militarum, at the Imperial Guard, because that's what they do, and that's how they play, and that's their aesthetic. There's a lot of Dubros or a lot of tanks just rolling up the field, doing what they can to fight against technologically superior and weaponly sounder armies. And I think that's part of the appeal of Astra Militarum is against those odds still fighting back. And I think they're going to be a viable army, because I think you're going to be able to do it. But at the same time, if your concept of painting a billion guardsmen doesn't appeal to you, then maybe that army isn't for you. But if the concept of painting up a billion guardsmen and having a billion painted guardsmen does appeal to you, then yeah, go for it, because you're going to be able to make them viable in 8th edition. You can make them into an army that will perform on the tabletop the way you want them to. Just because of how they're balancing things out, I think it's going to make things a lot more interesting, a lot more even, and because that allow you to do a lot more things. Also, I don't think you need to worry about being hedged into a single list anymore. And I think because of that, there were a lot of people that were like, well, I like so for instance, so say you like the aesthetic of the Space Wolves. The concept of giant space Vikings going to battle seems really cool. Well, what if you also happen to not like Thunderwolf Cavalry? I think they're cool, but what if you didn't? What if you didn't like their aesthetic? What if you're like, that seems silly, riding giant space wolves? That seems crazy to me. That doesn't seem fun. That seems like a little over the top for me. Well, if that's the case, there were very few viable 7th edition lists that didn't involve Thunderwolf Cavalry, because that was the unit in that codex that performed really, really well. Or, for instance, with me and Dark Angels, I loved the Terminators, and I spent a lot of time painting up 40 some odd Terminators in that off-white, in the off-white armor. And in so doing, that's what appealed to me about the Dark Angels a lot, were these Terminators and these fun, giant, hulking suits, just like marching down the field, shooting and then punching in the faces of anything that got close enough. In 7th edition, I didn't really have the ability to bring them out unless I just wanted to bring them out for fun. They were not on a competitive list of mine. They didn't go to a tournament with me ever since they came out with the 7th edition codex, just because they just weren't strong enough. They suffered a lot of setbacks. They didn't have enough the formations that they came with didn't boost them enough to make them viable for me in a competitive scene. If I wanted to be competitive with Dark Angels, I brought bikes, you know? And I like bikes, they're fine, but they're not, I'm not a huge fan of bikes, you know? They're not my favorite thing to paint, they're not my favorite thing to play. The way you play them isn't how I really like to play. So, you know, in 7th edition, as I was going to competitive scenes, I was bringing a lot of bikes because those were the ones that performed well. And I was bringing a lot of Black Knights, which are cool, but not my favorite. Like, aesthetically, they're kind of cool. They've got the, you know, the things, and it's fine. I like them. But those were what I had to bring if I wanted to be competitive with Dark Angels in 7th edition. In 8th edition, now that Terminators are probably going to get 2 wounds, that makes them innumerably more survivable and makes them a much better option to bring than they are currently. And in so doing, makes the fact that I can now create, well, I don't know. I guess I can be proven wrong as soon as the 8th edition drops, but in my mind it sounds like I'm going to be able to bring the kind of lists that I want to bring. They're going to make everything seem a little bit more viable and make it a better option that you can do what you want to do to play and have fun and still hang on and be competitive. You know, I'm sure I'll find a way to make a more optimized Dark Angels list once everything finally drops, and who knows, it may not involve Terminators, but I think that because they're boosting Terminators the way they are, that they're still a viable option. They're now a viable option that you can bring into competitive scenes. So for that, so what if you were a Dark Angel? What if you like the idea of the Dark Angels, but you really like Terminators, but you really couldn't bring them to a competitive list like I do? In 7th edition, it was like, well, then you could just understand that you're going to lose most games in those tournaments when people are bringing highly optimized lists, or you could just not bring them to those tournaments and only play them with your friends, which is fine, but I'd rather be able to bring whatever I want to a tournament and still have a chance to hang in there, because I feel like I'm a good player. You know, when it comes down to it, when it comes to tactics, when it comes to sound understanding of how the game plays, I feel like I'm pretty good, you know? And I don't want to bring a list that's going to handicap me when I go to a tournament. But if I can bring a list that's not going to handicap me, and I can bring the kind of units that I want to bring that I think are looking cool, then that's win-win. You know, I don't see any way that that's not a win for everybody at that point. And because of that, I think it allows you, even if you want to play competitively, if you want to be a part of tournaments, if you want to get involved in the bigger tournament circuits like the ITC or the ETC, you know, if you want to go out and play in the big tournaments and the big gatherings, you can now. And you don't have to choose an army that's going to be good at that. You can choose to play however you want to play with whatever you want to play. And I think that's going to be a huge boon to this game in choosing your armies, is because you can now choose an army however you want and play it kind of the way you want to. So yeah, that's my feeling on how this is all panning out, is that ability and that ability to just kind of be more varied in the kind of list that you're going to bring makes choosing armies all the more fun. And it doesn't even limit you to just choosing that one army. So now you have an option where, say there's been an army that you've kind of had your eyes on for all these years, but they were never really good. You thought they looked kind of cool, but you know, if you tried to bring them to a tournament, they were just going to disappoint you. Well, now's your opportunity to try to collect them again. You know, go out there, buy those lists. Also, now, because of the way they've been talking about keywords, you no longer are kind of limited to just using the one kind of army anymore. Now it looks like there's going to be wider variants of keywords that are going to make things more interesting, more varied. You know, like they talked about the hierarchy of the keywords, the way they're going to have them. That there's going to be more broad keywords like Imperium, or then they're going to get a little bit more narrow. So maybe you go into Space Marines, and then maybe even more narrow, and you go into like Dark Angels. You know, so that on each of those levels you can make a list that involves them all. But the more narrow you get with that keyword, the more command points I think you get, the more stratagems that it unlocks. So if you have an Imperium-based army, you're going to have the ability to open up a certain number of stratagems. But if you get more specific and start bringing, say, if you start bringing, like I said, a Space Marine list, so say you have some Thunderwolves and you have some Black Knights and you have some Centurions and you've got some Death Company, they would all fall under the Space Marine keywords, and those keywords would then open up certain stratagems for you that you wouldn't have if you just did you know, the Imperium keyword. But now say you only brought Dark Angels, you know, in my case. So I brought a whole bunch of Deathwing, and I brought some Raven Wing, and I brought a little Green Wing, and they're all under the same keyword of Dark Angels. I would then unlock another set of stratagems that were available to me. I don't know if all of those are going to be available at launch. I think those more specific ones are supposed to be, I think, coming out as they come out with more and more books, which is their plan. And I think that, but that's just a kind of a cool thing. So say I want to go in there and I'm like, you know what? I feel like playing with all of these toys that I think are cool. So I think Furioso Dreadnoughts seem really cool, and I'd love to get them into a list, but I don't necessarily want to collect only Blood Angels, you know, and I don't want to collect a large force of Blood Angels. I just want to use it to supplement things. Well, now you can. You just don't get you don't get the more specific stratagems when you play with it. By the way, I am really liking this gold so far. It looks really cool, and it goes on very smooth and very well. So, yeah, if you're looking for one, Retributor Armor Gold is pretty good. But yeah, and now you can run things, and I think it would be kind of cool narratively, or I don't know how competitive it would be, but it would be kind of cool to run like a ragtag group of survivors of a giant apocalypse battle coming together. So you've got this, you know, you've got a veteran Astra Militarum squad that happened to survive, that came together under command of a Space Marine captain, and you've got some Tempestus Scions that happen to be there, an Inquisitor or something like that. Those would all be able to put together on the same list, and I think that would be kind of a cool way to to play narratively and be able to have them on a list. And I know, you know, people are probably saying, well, you could do that now if you want to Unbound. But, you know, I don't know. I never liked the idea of Unbound armies. It didn't appeal to me. So now being able to have them be bound, and yeah, it may narrow down the number of stratagems that I could employ, but I can still have some, and it makes it a little bit more interesting. It makes it fun to be able to play that and kind of have that kind of flexibility, you know. And it also allows you to go in and fix gaps that you have. So, you know, if you've been running your Space Wolves and you're like, you know what, I don't really, or my case, the Dark Angels. Say I'm running my Dark Angels and I don't necessarily, the Flyers never really wowed me. You know what I mean? I've got. Sometimes it's fun to run the Dark Talon, but you know, it never wowed me what we've had access to when it comes to Flyers as a Dark Angel. So, but I've really liked, like, a Storm Ravens have kicked my butt numerous times, and I was never able to run them because I don't have another Space Marine army that I run. So now I can get one and I can run it because they can work with it, and I just don't, you know, I don't get the benefits of having an only Dark Angels army. But if I wanted to get some air superiority in there, I can do it, you know, and I've got the ability to get those Flyers, which I think is fun. It's a lot of flexibility. It allows you to collect things, and yeah, I'm sure it's a specific strategic decision on GW's side, on GW's part, to get people to collect a lot more, you know, models and stuff like that. But, you know, they're a business, and if they can come up with an idea that I think is cool and allows them to stay more competitive and stay open as a company, then bully. That's win-win in my opinion. Yeah, so now maybe that's another thing that leads you to figure out what you're gonna take an army. You need to look at what other kind of armies also share the same keywords and allow you that kind of flexibility to pick and choose what appeals to you. You know, that now becomes part of the decision-making process, which I think is fun, and I think it's really cool, and I think it's going to be I think it's going to add something to the whole mechanic of building armies and building lists and building everything involved with collecting and hobbying. So, oh, and it goes on really well on the silver too. Ooh, yeah. I am a big fan of this gold. So, this might be my new go-to gold. Retributor armor, everybody. That's Phil Hall's decision of cool gold paint. Yep, big fan of it. Yeah, so yeah, those are just some of my ideas on kind of like what army you should play in 8th edition. You know, go follow your heart, follow your aesthetic, follow your gameplay, and you're going to be able to make them viable. You know, whatever army you choose, there's no wrong move at this point, which is what I think is fantastic. The ability to just choose what's going to make you happy and be able to choose what's going to be more fun for you. And in so doing, creating a game that's going to be a lot more viable for you, and it's going to stick around a lot more. Because I had a lot of friends who played armies that just got their butts kicked, and they lost a lot of, you know, I've even had people comment on here that they lost a lot of the joy of the game because of the way things balanced and the way the mechanics were in 7th edition, 6th and 7th edition even. And I think that's a fair criticism. You know, I think there were a lot of things that kind of became very difficult to deal with in 7th edition and keep your hopes up and keep your spirits up. You know, I have some friends who were diehard orc players, and it became difficult for them to go to tournaments with their orc lists and kind of get beat all the time. You know what I mean? That's not easy to do, to keep up your spirits, to go there and pay your admission fee and just get beat all the time. You know, it's hard to have that happen over and over again. And I think in 8th edition, with this new balancing that they're going to do, I think you can go there and have an expectation to win. You know, at least not necessarily an expectation to win, but at least an expectation that you're not just completely lost the second you go in there because of your army choice. And I think that kind of ability to do that is what's going to make 8th edition so strong. And I think it's what's going to make choosing an army so much more easy and difficult, because you can no longer just depend upon what the internet tells you. You kind of, oh, I'm sure you will be able to do what the internet tells you, but I think you're also going to have to kind of get an idea of what it is that you want to do. You know what I mean? Because no longer are you just going to be able to take that specific warp spider list and just expect to perform well. You know, you're going to have to know the army, you're going to have to know everything about it, you're going to have to know how to play it, you're going to have to know how they all work together on those lists. And that list is also now going to have to face off against a whole lot more stuff. You know what I mean? So like when I would bring my grav lists, it would perform really well against most armies that came against it. You know, I would have trouble against demons, but you know, that was like a few of the lists that I would face. So I could feel pretty secure in the fact that if I load up on grav, that I'm going to be able to perform well. And in so doing, I would end up just bringing a lot of grav, because why bring anything else if that's going to perform best for me on there? But now, with a whole lot of different armies, a whole lot of different units now becoming more viable to bring, I'm going to have to make a list that can handle all of those new things. You know? And that's, I think that's exciting to me. I'm going to have to be, you know, thinking about lists, figuring out what's going on, what things work together, what things are synergistic with each other, and what things can accomplish different goals that I'm going to want to do. Because I'm sure there's still going to be an aspect of Maelstrom involved in there. I'm sure there's going to be still going to be aspects of a whole bunch of different things. And because of that, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I want that red, I think. Yeah, I think I'm going to make that one red. So I think army list building is going to be a lot more fun now, because there's going to be more viability, more options, and because of that, I think we're going to have just things are going to get a lot more interesting, I think, and I'm excited about that. And I think you should be excited about it too, to be honest. I think it's something that's you know, I'm under no illusions. I don't think that this is going to be the end-all be-all system, that they're not going to need to make any more changes, that there aren't going to certain things aren't going to come to light as more and more people play. that need fixing, but it sounds like they're going to be more apt to respond to that and apt to changing things that become more obviously broken. And as in so doing, I think they're going to keep that balance a lot longer than we had, you know, with 7th edition. So I think it's something to be excited about. I think it's something that we can all kind of get on board the hype train about. And I think you can, I think it's going to make things a lot more fun and interesting. Another thing you might want to consider is some of the rumors of the new armies and stuff that are coming out. So they talked about the Primaris Marines, you know. I don't know if a purely Primaris army is necessarily the way you want to go, but they sound like they would be fun to add into a Space Marine army. So maybe you choose a Space Marine army so you can bring some of those guys along for the ride and see how they perform. Especially as we get to see some of the other types of Primaris Marines as they've talked about. They've kind of teased out some of the new models they're going to be coming out with. The Death Guard, I think those are going to be really interesting to see. So maybe that kind of leads you into choosing an army that you're going to bring. The new things that are going to be released and just being able to run with those and see how those perform. That's an interesting way of choosing an army. The new hotness, but not just because it's the new hotness that performs well, but the new hotness that looks cool and is getting new models and new stuffs. That would be a kind of a cool way of choosing an army, in my opinion, just going that way. So yeah, those are just some of my ideas, some of my thoughts on this whole process. Choosing an army, I don't think is going to be as limiting as it used to be, so you need to feel a little bit more at ease about that. But at the same time, I think that you're going to have to spend some time figuring out what you want to do with an army before you can really start collecting it. Because, like I said, if you start collecting Tau and you decide, well, I want to make an in-your-face assaulty list, you're going to have a hard time. And so it's going to get kind of frustrating, kind of trying to create that kind of list for yourself based upon the army that you've purchased. So I think if you take some time to think about what you want to do, how you want to play it, what parts of the game appeal to you most, and then choose an army that kind of works well with that. Say you like tanks, Astra Militarum, you can't go wrong with them. You know, do you like big armored dude bros walking around with cool guns? Space Marines, you can't go wrong with that. Do you want to have, I don't know, anything else? If you come up with an idea, go with it and figure out an army that works with it. You know, there's shooty armies, there's assaulty armies, there's mobile armies, there's fast armies, there's slow plotting armies. All sorts of armies out there for you to kind of explore and choose. And I think at this point, you can't really go wrong with them. I think it's just a matter of figuring out what you want from them and making them do what you want them to do. So, yeah, choosing an army now is going to be fun. And I think it's going to be exciting. And I think you're going to have an opportunity to kind of create the experience that you want to create with it. I think you're going to be able to have fun with everything that they're talking about, and I think you're going to be able to compete with whatever it is that you decide that you want to do. You know, and I guess I say whatever with a little bit of addendum. Like I said, if you were trying to make an assaulty Tau army, you're probably going to have a hard go of it, just because you've kind of made your life a little bit more difficult in trying to do that. But if you wanted to make an assault army, you can do that easily. If you want to make a shooty army, you can do that easily, and you can be competitive in the system and in the world that we play games in. So, I guess my final thoughts on this all are, I think 8th edition, choosing an army in 8th edition, really gets back to the more base aspects of this hobby, the things that brought us into it, the things that attracted us to it. Because now you can choose an army whose aesthetic you like, whose game style you like, and you're going to be able to make a competitive list with it. You're going to be able to make a competitive army with it. And because of that, nowadays, I think choosing an army is less about figuring out which army's the best and it's now turned into figuring out which army is best for you. So there's a bit more of an onus on you to choose, to think about how you want to play, to think about the kind of game style you want to do, and think about the aesthetic that you want. But once you've done that basic homework, it's opened up avenues of this game that I think haven't been open for a long time. And I think that in so doing, they've really made things far more interesting, in my opinion, and exciting. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. I think that's kind of what we have to look forward to. I'd love to hear your opinion. Why don't you tell me what kind of armies you think you're going to collect going into 8th edition? Tell me what you think people should think about when choosing what kind of armies to collect. Any opinions that you have, any recommendations you might have for people, because sometimes people come on here looking for an answer. So why don't you give them one if you think you know best? I'd love to hear what you have to say. Or do you disagree with me? Do you think that this is not the best idea of how to figure out an army that's going to work for you in 8th edition? Let me know in the comments below. We've had some pretty cool conversations down there, and I'd love to keep that going. The engagement has been fantastic, and I've loved it. And I try to respond to every single comment, so please let me know what you think. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed it. I hope that you got a little something out of it, and that it made any kind of sense to you at all. So, like I said, let me know in the comments below. Share it with a friend who may be thinking about what they want to do with 8th edition. You know, I think there's a lot to be excited about, and I think that choosing an army is part of that. And I think that choosing an army is now going to be a fun, exciting part of it, as opposed to this stressful experience of wondering whether or not you're going to be competitive or not, or if you're just going to end up going to the game store every week and just getting your butt kicked. And I think that now, because of the openness and the kind of parity that we're looking at getting, I think we're going to have much more, many more people bringing their armies to games and being competitive, and it being a lot more fun. And I think the good players are going to win, and they're not just going to win because of their lists. I think they're going to win because of being good players, and I think that's the way it should be. So, like I said, let me know down below what you think. Give us some ideas of what you think you're going to be looking for in choosing your army going into 8th edition, or if you're just going to stick with what you've done before and just roll with it into 8th edition, which is totally cool. That's kind of, I'm not starting anything new. I'm just going to keep plodding along and building up my Death Watch and my Gene Stealer cults to match them up with all of the ones that I've got for the Dark Angels. So let me know what you think, and we'll continue the conversation. So, I hope you guys have all enjoyed it. I certainly have enjoyed this conversation. And until next time, have fun.